Hi, my name is Thandi Gamedze. I am based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I work for an organization called the Warehouse Trust. My talk today is titled A Global Kairos, the Urgency for Contextual Analysis and Prophetic Imagination Beyond the Nation State. A bit of what I hope to explore in this talk is the meaning of Kairos and how it has inspired the Kairos movement all around the world, some of the lessons that this movement can teach us, and what our present Kairos looks like and what it is asking of us as followers of Jesus. So firstly, the word Kairos really refers to a moment or a time of opportunity and grace where there's the possibility for something different to happen. And I think the word possibility is really important because the change that could come is not inevitable, but requires us to take hold of it and act decisively in order to bring about that change. And I think in discerning these Kairos moments, these moments of opportunity, we need to become skilled in what Jesus refers to in the Gospels as reading the signs of the times or discerning the signs of the times. And this is really what the Kairos movement has tried to do in different spaces and different contexts. It started in South Africa in 1985, and the latest Kairos document that has been produced came out of Palestine in 2009. And really what this movement has tried to do in different spaces has been to analyze the context, analyze what's happening in terms of both what's going on in the world, but also what's going on in the church, and then to try and provide a prophetic imagination, try to discern what God is calling us as the church to do within that particular context. So the South African Kairos process and document was started and produced in 1985, with a second edition in 1986. And I think this document, both in terms of its methodology and its content, has a lot to teach us and has a lot that we can learn from for our own context. So firstly, in terms of the methodology, this process was started in a very particular context in South Africa's history, which was really a time of intensified crisis. The Apartheid government was increasing their forces of repression and brutality. And then on the other side, the resistance was increasing and stepping up as well. And many theologians, both lay theologians and professional theologians, were recognizing that the church's response was inadequate to what was going on in the context. And so they came together, and in this gathering, they discussed what was going on in the context and also the church's response or lack of response within this. Out of this dialogue and discussion, different themes emerged, and then groups were identified to go and work on and research and explore these different themes further. The group then met back together. The different groups presented on the themes that they'd been working on. These were then critiqued and discussed and debated, and different things were identified that needed a bit more work and deeper exploration. They went away, did that work, came back together, and again presented to the bigger group. Things were adjusted within conversation and debate. And then this final document was sent out to different Christian organizations around the country, who then had a chance to comment or critique, and some of these changes were incorporated, and it was kind of thought about as this living document. And then the framework that it provided in terms of its content, I think, is also really important as we analyze our own context today. So it gave these three different theologies, and within that itself, I think it's important to recognize this idea of theology as a site of struggle, theology as something that's not neutral, just kind of coming out of the sky and landing in our laps, but a site of struggle where power dynamics are at play. So it first talks about state theology, which was really the theology of the apartheid state perpetuated through the Dutch Reformed Church, and it defines this theology as follows: the theological justification of the status quo with its racism, capitalism, and totalitarianism. It blesses injustice, canonizes the will of the powerful, and reduces the poor to passivity, obedience, and apathy. Then we have church theology, which was identified as largely the theology that was coming out of the English-speaking churches of the time. And this, it was said, was in a limited, guarded, and cautious way critical of apartheid, but this criticism was superficial and counterproductive, because instead of engaging in an in-depth analysis of the signs of the times, it relied upon a few stock ideas derived from Christian tradition, and then uncritically and repeatedly applies them to the situation. And so in doing that, it ended up also upholding the status quo. And then it provides an alternative called prophetic theology. And this prophetic theology situates itself in the tradition of the Old Testament prophets and does this deep contextual analysis, which then has this prophetic imagination coming out of it, which really calls Jesus' followers to address and critique the different injustices of the time and live towards something different, towards God's peace and justice for the world. Crisis always offers us a Kairos moment, and I don't think Kairos is limited to moments of crisis, but I think crisis moments offer us a moment of opportunity where things could potentially change in ways that they were not able to in supposedly normal times. Black theologian Takatso Mofa-King has this brilliant quote back in 1987 in the Journal of Black Theology in South Africa, which says, "Paradoxically, it is at times like these, when Black life hangs very precariously on the precipice, that a liberative theology is a real possibility. Such times of deep cleavages in life and faith are paradoxically times of great theological possibilities." I think in this present time, again, we find ourselves in this time where Black life and vulnerable life is hanging very precariously on the precipice. And so, paradoxically, as he says, we have this time of great theological possibility as well. We live in a time of COVID-19, this virus that has ravaged so many different communities and continues to do so. We live in a time of great inequality, which is only increasing, a time of hunger, a time of climate change, which is devastating places all around the world in different ways. And so in this time, I think we need a Kairos process, but a process that, like these different issues that we are facing, transcends borders. COVID-19 has no respect for borders. It travels across the world, ravaging different spaces. Climate change has no respect for borders. The things that are done in one place have ramifications for various other places. Similarly to global capital and multinational organizations where labor is exploited in one part of the world and in another part of the world people are consumers. So these issues move across borders and do not think in terms of nation states. And so there's a need for us to stop thinking in terms of nation states as well, and start to do this work of contextual analysis and prophetic imagination, which extends beyond any of these superficial and these created borders. Emmanuel Katongole invites us into reimagining outside of the idea of the nation state and recognizing that this is a thing that was created. The world was not born divided up into nation states with borders drawn. This was something that was created and perpetuated and now lives in our minds, and we embody it in the way that we are. But in this time where these issues that we're facing are transcending borders, we need to start doing the work of freeing our imagination from these borders as well. And I think that is what this present Kairos time is inviting us into. Doing the work of of very deep local analysis, contextual analysis, but also global analysis, and recognizing how these contexts intersect and overlap and feed into one another, so that we can expand our theological framework and we can expand our prophetic imagination to something that actually addresses the nature of the world that we live in today. And I think as Jesus followers, this is what Jesus is inviting us into as we faithfully try to walk out God's peace and justice for the world today. Thank you.